Hello there everyone. I decided to make a video because I had quite a few people ask me so nicely to make a video of Ratchet Clank Rift Apart launching from a hard disk drive. Please excuse any audio or editing issues. I haven't edited a video since high school. But I digress. As you can see, at the beginning, I showed that I had a SSD and a hard disk drive, and I'm launching it from the files so you can see that it's being launched from the hard disk drive. As you will see, I'm playing at probably mostly ultra and high settings. I'm not sure I'm actually recording this ahead of time, about 4 days ahead of time, actually, because I am that confident that it's going to work. So, you will see that the game doesn't have severe pop-ins, doesn't have severe stuttering issues, that in fact the game runs fine. It doesn't have any of the issues that a bunch of fanboys kept saying that it would. Way too many people were saying that this game can only run at 720p 30 FPS on a hard disk drive, which is what this video is all about. So, before you leave any comments saying, well, you should build a system that's similar to the PS5, or you should do this, or you should do that, that's not what this video is about. This video is me basically just laughing at all of the ridiculous people who keep saying that this game is going to be running at 720p on a hard disk drive, because they don't actually know anything about hardware. And it shows because they get this idea from a misconception that they had from a developer quote that they misquoted. And the worst part is that then after a couple of fanboys misquoted it, you saw a bunch of news media outlets start repeating that messed up quote that wasn't from the actual developer, because, you know, they can't do their freaking job and just look at the video that the developer literally says has the actual quote in. Instead, they just took what fanboys on Twitter said. But I'm going to be nice and explain to you how this works and how you were mistaken and where the misconception comes from. So, when you're playing a video game, the information does come from the hard drive, but that information is sent to the CPU. The CPU then processes the information and stores the information that it's processed that it will need to grab again soon to the RAM. And then the CPU sends the visual information to the GPU, so the GPU can process the visual information, and then it stores that in the VRAM. So, anytime the GPU needs to pull a texture or a graphic from something, it pulls it from its already processed information in the VRAM. And for the CPU, the RAM. The reason fanboys are confused by this is because the previously mentioned misquote from the developer.
Exploring these brand new spaces, and this is something that we never could have done on previous generations. Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart is a game that utilizes dimensions and dimensional rifts, and that would not have been possible without the solid-state drive of the PlayStation 5.
A lot of fanboys took that quote as meaning that it was only possible on the PS5's SSD because it was somehow magic or something. I'm not exactly sure. When I heard that quote, the first thing I thought was, okay, so because of the unique way the SSD is utilized, because PlayStation actually has a pretty cool piece of technology, they actually made a really cool device, and how they utilize the storage is actually pretty cool. But fanboys just can't comprehend that, so they made up their own talking point. But what I took when I first heard this quote was that the game was able to be developed the way that they wanted it to, using the transitions the way that they wanted to, because of the technology that the PS5 had, which isn't necessarily new technology, it's just the way that they utilized it that made it unique. Now, mind you, they were saying this as the PS5 being their target, and was most likely comparing it to the PS4, in which the PS4, while this game could be made to work on it, the PS5 has 16 gigabytes of RAM that's shared between all of its processes. Now, for a game like Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart, where it's constantly transitioning between the portals, in the entire layout, the textures, the physics, all that are changing, that amount of RAM would not normally be enough. So, what the PS5 does is actually really cool, because instead of storing stuff just on the RAM, when it needs to, it can take processes that aren't as important and put it to the SSD in a temporary folder. So then it can pull from the SSD, which technically isn't a completely new concept, but the way that they do it is actually really amazing, because instead of removing an entire folder or large caches of RAM, instead it targets specific folders, takes those out, and then replaces it with the new information from the SSD to circumvent the issue that would be the RAM being overloaded, because that can cause texture pop-in issues and a bunch of other issues. So you would need a fast storage for this. That's what the developers were talking about. This isn't a problem for most PC gamers, because most gaming PCs have 16 or more gigabytes of RAM, and most graphics cards nowadays come with 8 or more gigabytes of VRAM, unlike the 16 gigabytes of shared RAM in the PS5. And the fact that this has been a good talking point that has been available to these fanboys for the past 2 years, and I haven't heard a single one of them use it because they just can't understand this. The way Sony used that technology is amazing. This could literally advance how gaming machines are made, how machines in general are made. And immediately after PlayStation did this, announced this, we had other companies working on their own way to do it, their own circumvention with the direct storage, and probably even more companies working on other ways to do this. This is how technology advances, and Sony helped start it, but you don't hear this from fanboys. Instead, you hear a fake talking point that Sony and Insomniac never even said. So my message to all the fanboys is, congratulations, you played yourself. Do better next time.